You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. But this has been a theme in the comments. People say that universal healthcare would be removing competition, or it's socialist, or insert other Tucker Carlson talking point. But where do you think the competition exists right now in the first place? You see how competition works, and consumers create demand by picking and choosing the services or products that they want. Suppliers compete with each other to provide that product to the end consumer. But you as the end consumer of healthcare ain't choosing shit. Your employer chooses the insurance provider that best suits their bottom line, and your insurance provider tells you who you can and can't see and what procedures you can and can't get, which drugs they will and won't pay for. So that lack of competition is piled on top of the fact that healthcare itself naturally has limited competition because it requires an insanely skilled workforce, doctors, engineers, biologists, chemists. There's insanely high overhead, and it requires really expensive R&D with no guarantee that that R&D will ever pay off. And even in the best case scenario where competition does actually happen in healthcare, companies aren't going to go for the healthcare we need. Why spend millions on R&D trying to cure cancer that you may never be able to figure out a solution to when you can spend a lot less making boner pills and anti-balding cream? And universal healthcare doesn't mean that the government is providing healthcare. It means it's providing the insurance for healthcare. Still have private hospitals employing private doctors who prescribe privately developed pharmaceuticals. And you can pretend like, oh, the government will just make it go to shit, but that's a shit argument. When the government chooses to fund stuff, they do it really well. The Apollo program, the SR-71 Blackbird, nuclear fission, and they literally cannot do any worse than private insurance for healthcare. The US has the most expensive healthcare in the world. Not the best, not the most inclusive, but by far the most expensive, to the tune of about $4 trillion a year. And a quarter of that's administrative costs. About $500 billion a year is literally just medical and insurance billing alone. 18% of insurance premiums go solely to insurance company overhead and operating costs. Hospitals have teams of people with college degrees whose entire job is just billing insurance companies. And insurance companies have teams of people with college degrees whose entire job is trying to deny those billing claims. So if the government does such a shit job at everything, why is private health insurance administrative cost 20% and Medicare is like 1.5%? On top of all of this, the US government still provides about half of the R&D funding for medical research because private companies aren't doing it. 53% of pharmaceutical costs go to private middlemen, wholesalers, drugstores, and insurance companies. So universal healthcare would drastically reduce middlemen and admin costs, and then can foster competition with its huge buying power. Put out a bid for 100 million units of insulin, and insulin companies compete to win the bid. Put out a $100 billion bid for a cure to lymphoma, and companies compete to win the contract. It baffles me that we can have the most expensive and some of the worst healthcare in the world. Most countries around the world have had effective universal healthcare for decades, and people still argue for our current system. It's fucking mind-blowing.